Hello, and thank you for joining us for this episode of AMA's Marketing In. I'm your host, AMA CEO Bennie F Johnson. In our episodes, we explore life through a marketing lens, delving into conversations with individuals that flourish at this intersection of marketing and the unexpected. We hope to introduce you to the visionaries whose stories you might not yet have heard of, but are exactly the ones you need to know. Through thought-provoking conversations, we'll unravel the challenges, triumphs, and pivotal moments that have all been shaped by marketing. Today, our guest is José Villa, founder and president of Sensis, an integrated cross-cultural marketing agency. Founded in 1998, today, Sensis is the largest independent multicultural agency in the U.S. It started off as a website development firm and has now expanded the company into a full-service advertising agency with over 150 employees across 6 offices across the U.S., Colombia, and Mexico. Prior to Sensis, José was a founder of one of the pioneering Hispanic.com organizations. He started his professional career as a management consultant, and his passions are in this space of cross-cultural marketing, marketing measurement, digital transformation, and more. We're excited to have him join us for this conversation about the intersection of cross-cultural marketing in the future. José, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Benny. Super excited to be here.
Well, it's really just an honor to have you here and to think about the impact that Sensis has had in your career. I'm curious, when you started in 1998, did you have envisions that you would be the largest agency of your kind?
No, I couldn't even imagine that. I was just trying to make it 1 month at a time.
Right.
Definitely had no visions of that. I was a couple years out of college and
Right.
yeah, I was just, that was definitely not my mindset. Could never have imagined where we are today.
I always love that as a question for true entrepreneurs. Did you ever imagine that you'd be at this space? And it's always the same. It's we were just trying to get one foot in front of the other. We were just trying to make it. So when you think about the kind of impact that you had, what do you see the biggest changes of what your clients needed in 98 to what your clients look for today?
Well, a lot has changed and a lot has stayed the same, I would say, in terms of what clients need. I mean, I would say definitely when I started, there was still a lot of educating them on the market opportunities. When we first started out, we were primarily focused on Hispanic and digital. So we were kind of at this interesting little intersection of this sort of, digital was just starting out in the late 90s. It was really taking off. And that was the kind of the era of the .com boom. And then Hispanic was kind of coming into its own as well. The United States marketers were starting to obviously embrace the idea that there was, a very large, lucrative Hispanic market, and we're starting to truly understand it. But we were kind of at the intersection of those two, big trends that were happening. And so there was a lot of education that had to be done about, the market being an attractive market for marketers. The Hispanics weren't just, poor immigrants who couldn't afford things.
Right.
We were dealing with the issue. I joke when I started out Sensis, we were answering questions like, Mexicans don't have computers. That was the kind of thing that those were the kind of barriers and challenges that we were having to address and trying to educate the market, brands that, the Hispanic market was online, was using technology, embracing it at higher rates than the general market, and that it was an attractive market. And today, fast forward to, 26 years later, it's funny, we're still doing a lot of education, still trying to communicate. There's always misperceptions, misunderstandings. I think, more marketers have come around. So it's less of an issue of, a complete ignorance at this point, but a lot of it is about just reminding them that, this is an opportunity. There's a lot of misconceptions and preconceived notions that are not correct. And so we're still doing a lot of education.
Right. Well, it's interesting. We look at the parallel rise of and growth and expansion of your work in agency, along with the economic impact of the community. I know there was just recently a report that came out last month that calculated that the impact of the U.S. Hispanic community and populations roughly is topping $3.7 trillion. And if it were its own GDP of a country, to be the 5th largest in the world. That's nothing to ignore, right?
Yeah, and that report that was put out by Latitude, it's a great encapsulation of the market opportunity, putting it in terms that I think a lot of organizations can understand, right? This is, one of the most dynamic markets. It is its own economy, within a large economy here in the United States. So the Hispanic market is a huge opportunity. And I think it's, finally being quantified in a way that's understood by a lot of organizations. And yeah, our rise in growth has been very much buoyed by the growth of the market. So, and I'm one of those people too. I mean, when you talk about the U.S. Hispanic market, you talk about that GDP, like we're part of that, a small part of it, but, Sensis, myself, and I am, Hispanic, son of immigrants. I came to this country and built a business and have hired hundreds of people over the years and generated a lot of economic activity. We are part of the story of that massive GDP impact.
Which is really powerful. I mean, it's one of the things I was excited when we had the opportunity to sit down and talk today, because I saw that, like, look at this incredible arc and story that's reinforcing your own personal narrative and values, and then the business that you're building in space. I often wonder, though, when we have a lot of listeners who are either starting off their marketing career or managing spaces, and they may be looking to have a deeper embrace in Hispanic marketplace. What advice do you have for marketers and brands to approach the community with respect, authenticity, and impact?
Well, I have kind of a tried and true sort of recommendation I always have and sort of answer that question, which is, always start with, understanding with research and data, and really try to make sure that you understand the market, dive into the data, understand the nuances of the market, because it is a diverse, non-monolithic market. Even though, we talk about 60 plus million Hispanics in the United States, they are from so many different countries. There are so many different levels of acculturation. There's young, there's old, recent immigrant, third, fourth generation. So it is a very complex and nuanced market, and you really have to understand it. You really have to kind of dive in. And thankfully, there's a lot of great data. It doesn't cost a lot, or it's free to access, to get like a baseline understanding of the market, and then being able to develop a strategy to think about how your business, how your brand, how your service offering fits into this community. Because when you understand the culture and the sort of size of the prize in the market, then you can understand where you fit in there. Because and often 9 out of 10 times there is a place, there is a big opportunity for a particular brand, a nonprofit organization that's offering particular services. I mean, this really cuts across the entire economy and all aspects of our society.
Right. Which, elevates this fact that it should be a priority on most brand strategic playlists, like understanding how to engage, and you're really missing something if you're not spacing in. You spoke a bit about research and data. I want to give you all a nod. Sensis just released some proprietary research, a study that delves into exactly this, looking at purchasing habits. And you went into a focus area of recent Hispanic immigrants. Talk a bit more about what propelled you to do this body of research and some of the key takeaways.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that, we try to eat our own dog food and practice what we preach. Talk about doing research and understand the market. At Sensis, this is actually the 6th proprietary study that we've put out, that we've developed on our own, looking at different aspects of Hispanic or the multicultural market. So this most recent study that we just published, called the New Hispanic Immigrant Report, is basically an in-depth, deep dive look at recent Hispanic immigrants from Latin America who have immigrated to the United States in the last 10 years. Looking at this population, which we felt was misunderstood or even unappreciated. There's obviously a lot of, we're in the middle of a political season, and immigration is a hot topic. There has been obviously a lot of discussion in the last 3 or 4 years around significant increase in immigration into the United States. We wanted to dive into that and actually take a broader look at the immigration that's been coming into this country for the last 10 years, because there has been a narrative around the Hispanic market that it is primarily now a native-born population. Most of the growth of the Hispanic market has been coming from native-born Hispanics, so, the children of immigrants or, second or third generation. And the data shows a very different story if you actually dive into it. And this is what this report was looking to do, is not only quantify, but also qualitatively understand some of the nuances of this new population, which is significant. We're talking, anywhere from, 10 to 15 million Hispanic immigrants that have entered the United States in the last 10 years, which is a market in and of itself, right? And that it's very different than previous waves of Hispanic immigration. There's a lot of nuances of this audience, this new marketplace. And so, again, in the interest of educating brands and companies about the opportunities that exist in the Hispanic market, this report really dives into this really interesting, underappreciated and misunderstood segment of the Hispanic population.
Right. And I think, as you said, work like this is really critical for us as marketers broadly to kind of build on and understand, to give you kind of as we said, that insights to move the market forward. I'm going to ask this question of you. You've built a business. You're a small business owner, and you've gone from you as an employee, I imagine, in 1998 to today. what do you look for in the next 149 employees? What are the things that you look for as a marketing business leader?
Sure. In terms of folks that we hire, yeah. I mean, again, we've always looked for a certain profile of person to join our team and to be part of our growth. And it continues to be the same. I mean, the biggest thing is we look for people who are curious,
Yes.
who are creative problem solvers. We're in the professional services business. Our clients come to us to solve really difficult problems for them, right? At the end of the day, if you kind of distill it down to what we're doing, they come to us to, fix a problem, to help them address an opportunity or market something really hard, something challenging that they can't do themselves, right? And so we're in the business of solving problems. And so we look for people who have that ability to think outside the box, who can think critically, who can do things they've never done before, and are comfortable. I love your description of the show, kind of at the intersection of marketing and sort of new opportunities. I mean, that's a lot of how we think about our business, right? We're kind of navigating sort of chaos and helping our clients identify opportunities out of it. And so we look for people who can thrive in that kind of an environment, who are comfortable with uncertainty, who are comfortable not knowing answers and coming up with new ways to answer them, and being extremely curious. I mean, I think that if I had to distill it down to one thing, it's curiosity. That's what we look for in our people.
I love it. And like I said, and it's such a regenerative trait, right? Curiosity leads to more prowess in the problem solving. So I'm going to ask this question about transformation over time. Complex problems, nuanced problems, innovation problems are often captured in the brief. All of the clients' hopes, wants, and fears are captured in the creative brief. How have you seen the creative brief transition over the last decade or so?
That's a great question. As somebody who struggles, my background, I run the agency, but I actually I do strategy work, and it's how I keep my foot in the business still, is getting involved in a lot of the strategy work that we do, and writing a brief is, I think, arguably the most challenging part of our business. A good brief is everything. It's kind of like if you have a good brief, like everything flows from there. I mean, how a brief has changed over time. I think there's a better understanding these days of like what is truly an insight. What is a really like insight that's going to move the needle. It's a word that's often thrown around, and I feel like a lot of people misunderstand what an insight is. You see a customer insight or market insight. It's it's a non-obvious truth that has a significant potential. It's an opportunity for a marketing problem solution. So a better understanding of what an insight is one of the things that I think is gotten better about the, brief today than, 10, 15, 20 years ago, and really diving in, going deep to understand that, that non-obvious truth about consumers. Like that's it. And that's what makes a good brief. That's what makes a good campaign, creative, everything.
I love that notion of the non-obvious truth at the beginning. I had a professor who once used to always chide that, an insight is that truth that once you hear it, you felt like you knew it all along. Right. Kind of having that moment where it's like it's completely foreign to you, completely vague. You didn't understand it. Once you hear it, it brings clarity to everything else. And you're like, I feel like I knew this all along, having that power. Now, I love the transition arc because you start off with web development as well, right? So these briefs and these problem solvings, and then it pulls into full advertising. Have you found that having such a special focus has been a challenge for the business over the years, or have you had clients be able to grow with you as well? Sometimes our organizations, we get either internal teams or external teams, we get pigeonholed into well, this is my digital crew, but I'm not thinking about them for my social integration or my broader integrated marketing play.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that was definitely, so you're right about our sort of trajectory in history. We started off as a digital agency. We started off building websites of all things in the late 90s. And definitely for I would say the first 10 years of our evolution of our life at Sensis, we definitely got pigeonholed. You guys are the digital guys. This is what you do. You do digital. And so it was very hard to sort of crack into the larger advertising world to do more traditional advertising. As we expanded, we were often pigeonholed. I mean, as you stated. And that was definitely a challenge. I mean, the market has evolved, obviously, over time. Digital's become everything, right? So what once was our sort of weakness and this pigeonhole that we were put into has turned into a strength of ours over the years, right? As digital kind of came to, become the center of everything, right? When it comes to marketing and advertising. So, what was our weakness eventually became our strength, but it was definitely not easy. And it was hard to get out of the pigeonhole, especially 10, 15 years ago where, there was this mentality in the industry that, you have all these specialist agencies that do one thing and one thing only. And that's the way you should be using services. And I've actually tried with Sensis to move more towards an integrated model because I think that is most effective most times for most brands. But, still fight that fight a little bit, because there's still obviously a mentality out there like, no, we need to have a separate media agency, a separate PR firm, And I really believe in the power of integration, especially now. I think it's even more powerful and important that all these different pieces sort of talk to each other and are coordinating, having a campaign that's taken into consideration, all these different types of marketing tactics, earned media, paid media, digital, traditional, the user experience, digital experience, the physical experience, all that needs to be integrated. And so I've always been a big believer, and I've tried to structure the agency in a way to deliver on this promise of integration being, the best solution.
Which is, I think it's a really powerful way. And part of what you're running up against, I'm sure, is kind of legacy infrastructure, right? I'm always amazed sometimes at what works together in an organization. And it may be because the leader that was Jose or Benny had a specialty between these two parts. And then they've built a function around that. But it may not be the best way to think about it all. It just so happens that Jose and Benny were really good at these two items together. Growing into it.
Or just also a legacy of a sort of a business model or an industry structure that's really not even relevant anymore. If you think about like media agencies, right? They're still obviously prevalent, but there's still this sort of notion that there's some sort of, because of, their ability to buy broadcast, right? At a significant discount, and there's a cost efficiencies. That's still an old school mentality from, the days when most brands marketing budgets were 70-80% broadcast. That's not reality anymore.
Right. It's so true. I remember one of the early marketing lessons I had, I was tasked with coming up with innovative models and places and new platforms, but I ran up against the old school model that the ad salesperson for the agency was best friends with the ad salesperson for the media platform, and there was no incentive for them to change.
Right.
They'd been running the media together for 15, 20 years. And so here you are on in-house with a mandate to come up with new experimental channels. And there was no interest in experimenting because that rocked the boat that had been there.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Still see a ton of that.
So, which is our challenge for today. But, I often wonder also, as you evolved and you start off, as a cross-cultural marketing agency, how do you manage the creative tension between good work and good strategy in general and good work and good strategy being earmarked for a cross-cultural market versus a more integrated mass market? Are you still navigating that tension?
Yeah, that's another great question because, as the market has evolved too, if you just look at the, the consumer marketplace, you look at the population in the United States, we have you can make an argument that the country now is sort of like a true melting pot. We do have, minority majorities in, if not the whole country, definitely in parts of the country. I mean, here in California where I live, the majority of the population is multicultural. It's Hispanic, African American, Asian, right? And so do you still take an approach of like a general market approach to a market like California, which is 40 million people? Or do you take a, multicultural, you kind of break up the market into separate and distinct segments and then do targeted segment advertising? Or do you take some kind of new integrated approach, what we call cross-cultural, which is taking into consideration all of these diverse markets and looking at them holistically? That's still a question that I don't think's been, answered. I mean, my personal answer to that is that it depends on the brand. It depends on the company and kind of their position in the marketplace. But, I've always felt that there's kind of three different models that are available. It's almost like a toolkit approach to cultural marketing, if you want to call it that. And that, we at Sensis are adept at using any of the three cultural marketing approaches, right? The sort of general market approach, the multicultural segment specific approach, or the cross-cultural, holistic crossover approach, right? Those are the three types of models. Yeah, there's oftentimes tension between which one makes sense, which one is right for a brand. But I think that tension can be solved through thoughtful, strategy and figuring out kind of where you're positioned in the marketplace to figure out which model makes the most sense for a brand. I always use the example of like a brand like Tapatio, a hot sauce.
Yeah. Yes.
It's a very ethnic brand that started off, came out of the Mexican community in LA, and very authentic, hot sauce has crossed over into the general market. Everybody buys Tapatio.
Right.
It's you can buy it at any supermarket.
Are you looking in my pantry right now, my friend? Or is that what you're doing?
Exactly. Right. It's like exactly, and that's a brand that I would argue should take a cross-cultural approach, because it is it should lean into its ethnic heritage, and it is very authentically Hispanic, but it can cross over to African American, to general market, to Asian. It works for everybody, and it should not be taking like a watered down general market approach. And it also shouldn't be doing just like ethnic specific marketing, because that's not what that brand is. That brand is crossover. Everybody loves Tapatio, right? So that's kind of a good example to kind of how I think about that.
Yeah,
which model makes the most sense.
When I was listening to you, I was, my answer to that question is always yes, yes, and yes, right? And I think that creative tension is what drives strategic advantage and growth for our brands, because our brands are really kind of moments in time, right? So all crossover hits started off in a specialty, authentic space. If you think about the way other culture, is extended in spaces, and that they're learning opportunities, because at any given time for a brand, you may be doing all three of those things in different spaces and audiences. Right.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Yeah.
And you're learning from it. I know we've had brands where, you try and you extend and you're like, yes, this authentic approach works really well if I extend it in this time after I built the foundation.
Yep. Yeah. And that's a good point too, because like at different times in a brand's journey, right, and its evolution, different models might be appropriate, right? So
yeah. But I think, I'm so fascinated by the work that you're able to do, because it is that moment, right? It's that inflection point for many brands where there's access to broader and deeper markets than they ever imagined, much like starting our business off, right? You have this hot sauce brand that we really love. You have this tortilla that we really love. And it turns into something more that becomes more dynamic. So when you think about, when we talk about cross-cultural marketing, we mentioned it before, I think being authentic becomes one of our superpowers in our space. What advice do you have for marketers about seeking authenticity for whatever brand they're doing, right?
Yeah. Well, that's super important as well. And maintaining authenticity. If you fail to be authentic, that is a death knell for a brand, particularly one that's trying to take advantage of different multicultural markets and communities. Some advice to stay, authentic is always having an ear to the ground, to the consumer, understanding your place in the market, never losing kind of sight, that on the ground sort of intelligence that is so important, because that's what's going to always be telling you whether you are still being, still communicating the right way or being authentic with your core consumers. So having that sort of access to, I always defer back to data but that is definitely, data has a lot of forms, and, qualitative information to understand how your brand is being perceived in different diverse communities is always the best measure of, are you being authentic? Is your brand remaining authentic? And then I guess the other thing I would say is always having sort of a, like an anchor to where you came from and what your brand has always been about, like not veering too far from that, because every brand has its, it's got, we were talking about guardrails, but like you have to be able to, like every brand has a story and a history, and it kind of came from a particular place, and it's always important to not veer too far from that. There's always a lot of room within those guardrails, but you have to stay anchored in who you really are. And that to me has always been, a big factor in authenticity.
Yeah. And I think to your point, the guardrails and the anchor give you the permission to play. Right. So if you can take 80% of your brand and have it rooted in the guardrail, that will give you permission to play with the other 20%, to do the unexpected, because it's still true to that. And I think about that with all the mashups that we see of some ungodly products that you would never imagine together. And somehow the mashup works just right.
Right.
Like playing that extra space. I'm always interested in how we work, right? And how we work with creative tensions and ideas. it's interesting. Sensis now, you have 6 offices across the US, Colombia, and Mexico. Talk a bit about how you're able to get the most in a dynamic way of having your team spread out in those unique locations.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because like the world has definitely changed for us.
Right.
We had 5 locations before COVID. We always talk about the world sort of before COVID and after COVID. And we had a different model for how we ran before COVID. It was very much each office kind of worked as a silo. We really embraced, there was a different culture in each office. Our Austin, Texas team was very Texas, our West Coast, LA versus our East Coast, DC versus our team in Atlanta, very South. And we kind of had silos, but, after COVID, we were all forced to kind of work together, remotely. And now kind of as we've moved into this like new model post-COVID where we still have the physical teams in the different locations, across the US and in Latin America, but we're now integrated as a team. So we work across all these different offices and they all each have their own vibe and their own culture, but we work across offices now and it's a completely integrated team. And we found that is created a lot of like, I don't want to say tension, but like it's brought together. You talked about, creative tension and sort of points of conflict in a positive way. Like that's where a lot of creativity comes from. And so we've been able to like harness that, these different teams with these different perspectives and these different, geographies and cultures, even within like different countries to kind of have them all work together. And really, I mean, we found that they produce amazing work when you combine these teams. In the old school days of advertising, you'd have the copywriter and the art director, on a team working together, physically located together. We still use the combination, but we now are like combining people in different offices and different countries and different cultures. And it's generating really cool work, really cool thinking that was not possible before. So it's really great. It's a cool model. I can't take credit that like we came up with this, like we did this purposely. It just kind of grew out of the COVID situation, but it's turned into a really cool, like we have this really cross-cultural operating model now, which is really neat.
Well, what I love about it, I had to ask the question because it shows up in our bios, right? When we think about the location, but post-COVID, it challenges the space where we're not limited by proximity, but proximity in your case becomes an amplifier, right? So we're not locked into the office in Mexico because it's physically outside of the US and physically locked in a space in there. This is just another spot in which you have creatives who are working together. And you can pull in those things. There's some unique inputs that are coming because of the location, but you're not limited by it. And you can then spread that to other spaces, which I think is, really powerful when you think about it. But it gives you another strategic advantage thinking about your work.
It really has. It's really played out that way. And it's been really neat to see the output in particular.
So, I'm always interested in that, in the unexpected. As you look back now, CEO of an agency in space, what surprised you the most over this journey? What is really, when you think, we're going into 2025 and you think about this moment, like what is surprising you the most as an agency leader today?
Boy, there's been a lot of things that have surprised me. It's, I guess, kind of going into this business, I always had a sort of a vision of like what that business was. This is even pre-Mad Men era, but like, I guess what surprised me is how fast things have changed in this business, how quickly, how significantly they've changed. Even just in my, 26 years of doing this, working in this industry, in this business, like to see like how much it's changed. Cause I, think when I started, I guess you don't know, you don't know what you don't know, but, just assume that, and I think maybe the world didn't change as much as it has. I think this is probably true of the various industries, but my goodness, have things changed so much and so fast. And it feels like the pace of change has only accelerated. And I think that's one of the big things that's like surprised me about an industry that's been around for so long. It's a very old, established industry, but how much it's changed in not a long period of time. I mean, even just in the last 10 years, how much it's changed, and the rate of change has been astronomical.
Right. Our clients ask you for different things today. We talked a bit about solving the big complex problem, but in a real strategic to tactical space, have the asks changed much of late?
Yeah, the tactical ask has changed. clients come in asking for different things. Today,
Right.
it's a lot of it, everything the asks always start with things like, I want to do a digital campaign or a social campaign or an
Right.
influencer campaign, right? So they're coming in with a different set of tactical requests, but the
Right.
strategic questions have not changed that much. At the
Mm-hmm.
end of the day,
Hmm.
it's still the same questions, we
Right.
got 20 years ago, which is, I need to move the needle on my brand. I need to
Right.
increase awareness. I need to acquire more
How do I
customers.
win? Right.
How do I win, right? And then that one question that we've been getting, or that request that we've been getting since the beginning, which is, I want to do both. I want to increase brand awareness and I want to
Right.
drive customers, and I want to
Right.
drive
Right.
sales, right? I want to do both top of funnel, bottom funnel. I want a campaign that's going to deliver on both. That's one constant that's never changed. They want
Right.
the world, and
It-
with limited budgets. And if anything, I would say the budgets have gone down and the asks have gone up. So
that's not the direction we want, my friend.
no, unfortunately, and you know what? The accountability has gone up, which is good. I
Right.
mean, we were always big on data and measurability of everything, but
Right.
definitely like the accountability. Like, I want to be able to measure everything, and I want to know exactly what my ROI was for every dollar I spent. That was not the case 10, 15 years ago. Now it's like,
Yeah.
it's just, that's the new way we got to do business.
Let me ask this question in two ways. So describe for me what's the dream client engagement from a fun perspective, and what's that engagement from an impact perspective. And they can be one and the same, but we know sometimes there are clients that are completely fun, but others, the work you're doing is changing their world.
Yeah, I mean, I think you get different answers to that question from my team, but
Right.
and some of the different disciplines, the creative team, the media team. But I do think at its core, the dream project and client is always the most complicated one, right? The one that
Right.
the one with the biggest ask, with the biggest challenge. Those are the ones that we love. The
Right.
hardest to reach audience, the most complex. I'm trying to. And also one that where we're going to have an impact on something more than just selling more of a product, because we obviously do a lot of work at Sensis that is not just consumer oriented, but also we do a lot of work with the government, with a lot of nonprofits, trying to do good and trying to have an impact on society. So we love those kinds of
Right.
projects and assignments where it's a challenge and it's going to do good. It's going to leave an impact beyond just some dollar increase in sales.
Right. Right.
A great example is a couple years ago, we did a campaign. We did a first ever national smokeless tobacco prevention campaign. It was through the FDA, but it was the first time anybody had ever targeted the use of smokeless tobacco. There's a lot of campaigns out there to get kids to not smoke cigarettes, but nobody had ever done a national campaign around smokeless tobacco, chew products, things like that.
Right.
We did the first ever campaign. We identified this interesting target audience, which was white rural youth, who are the most likely to use this product. And we developed the first of its kind, very hard to reach audience. We had to break through a lot of cultural challenges and norms to break through, and then had this huge impact on actually bringing down the rates of use of this, very dangerous and bad for you product, right? So that was a great example of like the kind of the perfect ideal client for us, and that kind of was a challenge, can have an impact, and kind of have a broader impact on society and our community.
Well, I'm going to continue with this theme and ask this question as we think about your own personal journey and narrative that you alluded to a little bit with your parents and your family, your American story with the business and the work you do. What are you most proud of, my friend?
I'm most proud of the people that have come through our doors and have worked here. Honestly, the thing that I always tell everybody that I'm most proud of at Sensis, like the metric, the thing that I get most excited about is the people who leave and come back. We call them boomerangs because there's a lot of them. We have a name for them here. And that's to me, that's the thing that I'm most proud of, is that there's people who come here, work with us, leave, for a variety of reasons. Early in their career, they're going to go to a bigger agency, or they've got an opportunity to a client side, or do something, the next step in their career. But then they come back to Sensis. To me, that is the most gratifying. That's the thing where I feel like I've made it. Like that I've created something that people experience and then want to come back to and want to be a part of again. Like, to me, that's like the ultimate. Like, I've created something special here, that people have that kind of an experience where they want to come back and be part of this. To me, that's the thing I'm most proud of.
I think that's a beautiful way to end our podcast, my friend. And in true fashion, I'm going to invite you back because I know you continue to do proprietary research on our community and the space that means so much. So we're going to come back again if you're open for it next year to talk about the next level of research. But thank you for sharing with us the journey and growth of the agency, navigating the tricky, complex briefs, having impact and balance, and really creating marketing that changes our world. Thank you, Jose, and the work that you're doing. Appreciate you being a friend of the AMA and joining us for this podcast.
Thank you, Benny. It's been a thoughtful, wonderful conversation. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. And thank you all for listening. This has been an episode of AMA's Marketing And. Once again, I'm your host, Bennie F Johnson. We encourage you to check out the research report from Sensis and the work that they're doing as a multicultural agency. We encourage you to explore AMA and all of the resources we have for both your marketing and brand needs. Thank you very much.